Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kamish Orr, and today, normally I'd be giving you either stories from the Maelstrom or giving you a breakdown of stats with that I've used RetroSheet to kind of pull from MLB data and do an analysis of that. But today, I'd like to talk about what I look for in a baseball game. Could either be cards and dice. It could be uh, computer baseball games, that kind of thing too. This actually was inspired by C&D TV, Cards and Dice TV. Tony over there, I watched his video, um, seven must-haves of his for a tabletop. I don't know if he was it just baseball. I think he may have just said tabletop sports in general. But in any event, I watched that video. It's a great video. I recommend you go check that out. And thought I would give my own take on it. Um, all of his answers were valid. I think it's a pretty individual thing to think about. So I'm taking a little bit different spin in terms of giving you my individual thoughts on what I look for in a game and what are my must-haves, and what leads me to enjoy the games that I play. Uh, give you just a brief background, but I started when I was very young. My Actually, both my parents played Stratomatic when I was, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, or 10, somewhere in that range, with friends of theirs. And finally, I got old enough that they allowed me to play a season. So I kind of got my first taste of Stratomatic back then, when I was very young, and played it sporadically off and on through the years. Mostly, though, when I got to my teenage years, I played um, computer baseball games. I tried pretty much everything out there. Finally, spent a lot of time with Out of the Park. Ran an online league and all of that. I have another video where I kind of go into all that detail, my journey. So I won't rehash that. But needless to say, cards and dice wise, I've played a lot of Stratomatic. I played Status Pro way back in the day a little bit. Um, Played the game with the spinner. I can't think of. I couldn't think of it the other video either, and somebody told me. In any event, currently my current project is with Payoff Pitch Baseball, which I kind of had a different, unique take on the way it gets you results. So I do have some other uh, games that I'm planning on trying out in the future, but I'm going to stick with my current league right now until I finish that up before I branch out to some other stuff as well. But when I was getting back into things last year, kind of had that itch to get back into the cards and dice baseball. There were a couple things that I was kind of really looking for in a game before I picked it. And so I kind of, as I said, just thought I'd go into that a little bit. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about 50-50 games versus other games in terms of how they achieve their results. Since there's a lot of talk out there about, some people say 50-50 games aren't good because you're not going to be able to really simulate those outliers as well, and it's not as realistic if you have Tony Gwynn, who hardly ever struck out, coming up to face uh, you know a high strikeout pitcher, and half the time it's going to be on the pitcher's card, and he's going to have way more strikeouts than he would normally. That kind of thing. Um, all the years that I played Stratomatic, I never really. It did bother me a little bit, especially if you bring in a closer with a very dominant card in the ninth inning, and you never roll on that card. Um, it seemed a little unrealistic because I'm like, it didn't feel as fair, I guess. But that being said, I can definitely see both sides of the argument in this case. Um, you can view it as the 50% of the time that it's on the pitcher's card, that the pitcher's kind of um, has the advantage in that at bat, whereas if it falls on the batter's card, the batter kind of has the advantage in that at bat, in the way the maybe the batter's ahead in the count when it goes on the batter's card, and maybe the pitcher's ahead in the count when it goes on the pitcher's card. So you can kind of play it off that way. One of the reasons I thought to try Payoff Pitch was because it handles things a little bit more uniquely by starting on the pitcher's card to determine the quality of the pitch first. So That's just one of the reasons that I thought to try that out. It was kind of a unique take on things, and I've had a lot of fun playing the league that I've played so far that uses that system. But that's why I kind of want to try some other things out in the future, just to see how things play out and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to make that comment about 50-50 versus other games. I'm not totally opposed to playing 50-50 games, but but I'm also not opposed to trying some other things out to see. So with all that said, I came up with about 8 things, and normally I would go from the least to the most thing or the biggest thing that I look for, but I think I'm just going to switch it around and give you the top thing I look for right away and kind of go from there because the top thing kind of bleeds into everything else. And so that top thing is statistical accuracy, of course. So I know there are games out there that are not quite as statistically accurate. They don't strive to be, they strive to be more fun. So they sacrifice a little accuracy in the fun factor. And then you have games on the other side, which are more statistically accurate. And if you, especially if you play the super advanced or whatever versions as they call it, you're going to get really accurate statistics. And so that's, I mean, the top thing I look for is that statistical accuracy. So that makes me shy away from games that either A, don't have individual player cards. They may just rate a player A, B, C, D, or F in terms of hitting or whatever, because to me that doesn't give quite enough variance to account for the different players' abilities. So I kind of shy away from games that just give ratings like that and don't really give you the real breakdown of statistics, like how often a particular batter hit triples or how often a particular pitcher struck out hitters. Because you can still have if you have a top quality pitcher, they can be a high strikeout pitcher or they could be more of a finesse pitcher like Greg Maddux or something like that. And I don't think you really get that variance if if you're just giving grades to players and they're not that varied. The grades aren't that varied, if that makes sense. So I tend to stay away from those games. I know some games kind of try to account for some of that, but that leads me to more games that are, as I said, at the very least, individual cards for individual batters and pitchers. And I guess the same could be said for fielding ability, base running, and that kind of thing. I know, again, that most games, they do grade in terms of base running and that kind of thing. So they're maybe not as statistically accurate in that sense when you're lumping a bunch of players in the same category. But for me, at the very least, you have to have individual batting and pitching cards to account for some of that. So statistical accuracy, the number one thing for me. Number two for me is having lefty-righty splits. Especially when I was trying to get back into things. I knew I didn't want to just play Stratomatic again. I mean, I do enjoy Strat. I play it with a friend of mine now and then, but I wanted to try something else out. And as I was looking at different games, if I came across a game that didn't have lefty-righty splits, I kind of, it didn't rise to the top for me in terms of something I wanted to play. Mostly because of the fact that I think it adds a level of strategy to the game. And again, it's statistical accuracy. It goes a little bit back to statistical accuracy. Now, I know Payoff Pitch doesn't have a lefty-righty split on the pitcher's card. Joe has made comments before that he does factor that in when he's devising the cards, but it doesn't have the pitcher's card itself doesn't actually have a lefty, versus lefty batters versus righty batters. But the batters are all rated lefty-righty, so that kind of was enough for me to try it out. And as I said, I'm having a lot of fun doing it. But if a game doesn't have lefty-righty splits at all, or I'd say if the lefty-righty splits aren't handled on an individual basis as much, then I tend to shy away from it. Because I know there are games that they factor it in by having an across-the-board adjustment for a lefty hitter facing a righty pitcher and vice versa. they'll have like an across the board adjustment to certain results. And so I don't, to me, that just doesn't feel as real to me for that to happen. So I've kind of shied away from it. So that's the second thing, lefty righty splits. Third thing for me is having all plays accounted for. What I mean by all plays is I want to see wild pitches. I want to see pass balls. I want to see balks every now and then. I know those aren't frequent things, but I know they happen. So I want to see some method that those things happen, because those rarer things that pop up to me are what make baseball feel real, I guess, or baseball when I'm playing it feel real. If a game doesn't account for that stuff, then again, for me, I kind of shy away from it or kind of downgrade it a little bit in how I rate it. And I know, again, some games really portray that in a good. I know Stratomatic does a pretty good job because every catcher is rated for a pass ball rating, for example. Every pitcher is rated for wild pitches and balks. So it gets really detailed in that. And if games don't take that into account, then they fall kind of further down on my list. Again, and I'm going in order here, so that's my third. That's the third thing on my list. If the lefty-righty splits are there and statistical accuracy is there, obviously that all plays isn't as important to me, but to me it should be there in some way to be able to account for some of that stuff. So number 4, along those same lines, is rare plays. So again, I think there are so many quirky things that can happen in a baseball game, and I want a game that accounts for some of that weird stuff that happens, because it really allows you to tell a better story, I think, when oddball stuff happens during the game that you're not expecting, or the unexpected occurs. So for me, I like the baseball game to have a pretty robust rare play system so that weird things happen. And, whether it's weather-related rain delays, I know some games account for rare plays with rain delays. Some of it's rundowns. It's those situations in baseball that don't happen very frequently, which is why they're called rare plays, but they do happen sometimes. And so I'd like to see some of that. Ejections, whatever it is, anything that makes the game feel more real, because it adds in that quirky factor, that those oddball things that can happen in a game that may shift the momentum maybe, or just something notable that's like, oh, that was not something you see every day, and I'm glad the game kind of accounted for it. So again, that's my number 4, would be like rare plays and the rare play system. Number 5 for me, and this isn't true for, I'm sure, everyone, but it's injury possibilities in the injury system. So if you're doing an as played seasons, then maybe injuries aren't as important to you because you're either not going to use injuries, or you're going to use the as played lineups anyway, so it really doesn't matter. Or maybe you're playing a short tournament or replay, and you don't want injuries to factor into it, because you really want the teams to be their best, put their best lineup out there. And so you don't really want injuries to disrupt things and cause major changes to the way things play out. But for me, injuries is another one of those things that just adds to the accuracy of the game and the realism of the game. I want something out there that makes it so that I can't just put the same lineup out there every day and have the bench players never get a shot at coming in the game ever. Now, again, there could be bench players that aren't going to get see a lot of playing time because realistically, you're behind Cal Ripken in the depth chart, and he's not taking a day off, for example. So I don't necessarily mean that, but what I mean is I don't want the same players out in the lineup without any reason for me to adjust things during the whole season. If I play out a whole season, I want there to be some injury possibility there that may disrupt things, and again, that just makes the game feel more real to me when I play. The fact that somebody could get injured and miss some games, and then they have to deal with Who's going to sub in, how's that going to change the lineup, and that kind of thing. It just makes it feel more real to me. So that was number 5, I believe. Number 6, again, we're starting to get down there now, so these things aren't quite as important, but they're definitely on my list. Something I take a look at anyway is the base running system. So how is runner advancement handled? How are stolen bases handled? Does the pitcher have a hold factor so that base runners can't steal as much on certain pitchers as they can on others? How's the catcher's arm taken into account? How are outfielders' arms taken into account when runners are trying to take an extra base on them? Because again, I think some of that stuff is decisions. It factors into a decision that you make. Whether to have the runner try to take an extra base or whether to have the runner hold because you have somebody out there in the outfield that has a cannon arm and they don't want to take the extra base, or you have a base runner who's extremely slow and doesn't ever take extra bases. That can really shift things in the game, and I want to see that that's somehow factored into things. So yeah, I'd say that the base running system to me is runner advancement and stolen bases primarily. I don't want it to just dictate that all the runners, regardless of the runner, he always a single always results in 2 bases on in certain cases, and 1 base in certain cases. A double's always 2 bases and that kind of thing. Or it's varied and it doesn't matter how fast the runner is. So whether you have, somebody super slow out there or you have Ricky Henderson out there, it doesn't matter. They're still going to get, they're still going to advance 2 bases regardless who the runner is. I don't want to see that. I want to see some variety in that based on how the runner really is. So that gets us to number 7, just kind of getting down there, and again, I think this one may bump up, but it's so hard sometimes. Some of these could very easily on another day be higher or lower, and that's the fielding system. So how much does fielding impact the game? How does the fielding system come into effect? And that's, not just a player's range, how often he can get to a ball, but how many times he makes errors. It can be catcher errors too. And, this also factors into pass balls and stuff a little bit, but mostly it's like errors and range factor and that kind of thing out in the field. And how much does fielding impact things? And, again, relating it back to Stratomatic, since that's what I played for so many years, I think it's a good system because they have a rating for range, though there's only 5 levels, A, B, C, D, and F, right? A, B, C, D, and E. In any event, there's only a handful of levels, whereas errors, they really get more detailed in terms of error rating. So I really like that. I want there to be some difference between fielders, and hopefully more individuality with fielders than just lumping them into just a couple of categories and calling it good. I want the fielding system to be something in play there. And that, again, that also comes in with outfielder arm. I want that to be factored in as it comes to fielding too. So that poor fielders really, you have to really take that into account when you're making a lineup. You're not putting somebody, you're not in a situation where you can just play whoever, wherever, and have it not really impact anything one way or the other. Especially in cases where you have a historically top tier fielder who was a poor hitter. If fielding weren't factored in, you really wouldn't have any reason to ever start that person or to have them bat if fielding doesn't really factor in at all. So I want to see some kind of fielding system in there. And then finally, I put this at the very end. It's marginal whether it really, can't really say I delve into this and really made a huge impact on whether I choose a game or not, but it's definitely something I look at more now than I ever have before when I've played, and that's the out distribution. How often do double plays happen? How often are balls hit to different fielders? how often are are there flyouts versus groundouts with certain pitchers, that kind of thing. Um, and again, I don't think this is something I really paid too much attention to in the past. All the years that I played Stratomatic, even recently, I never really considered the out distribution and whether it felt right or not, because I think the game just felt like baseball anyway. But now that I've been looking more in depth into the data, um, there are definitely cases where ground double plays happen more often to hit to certain fielders, and so I want to see that kind of factored into the results in the game that I'm playing in some way. I want it to feel real. I still want the game to feel real at that point. So again, a lot of this stuff factors back to my number one thing, which was statistical accuracy. Base running system, fielding system, out distribution. Those are all statistical accuracy. You can make the argument that rare plays is a little bit statistical accuracy, even though it doesn't happen very often. Box wild pitches, pass balls, so all plays accounted for is another case that factors back to statistical accuracy. Injuries may be the outlier that doesn't necessarily factor into statistical accuracy as much. But all in all, all of these things come together to make the game feel like it's giving realistic results that feel like baseball to me. I don't want it to be every game that you play is, 17-12 or 15-10. I don't want a bunch of football scores. I want the results to feel like they could legitimately happen. So that at the end of the day, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And so those are my 8. I'd love to hear your comments. What are things that you have to have in a game? What are things that you look for? Has your opinion changed over the decades or years that you've played? Are you okay now with certain things that would have been deal breakers before? Or are there games that, again, I know it's a balancing act between the fun factor sometimes and statistical accuracy, because you can get really accurate, but if it takes you an hour and a half to play every game, you probably aren't going to play it. So you have to kind of balance fun factor with statistical accuracy. I understand that, but so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. What are things that would be on your list of must-haves? What are things that that you look for in a game? What are things that really scratch that itch for you? Drop those in the comments. Let me know. I'd love to read it. And if you like this content, if you like the channel, please consider subscribing, liking this video so more people can see it. I really would appreciate that. And I think that's where I'll leave things. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. And until next time, have a great evening.